So our next speaker is Simon Morris. He's the CEO of CogniVue, which is a fabless semiconductor and embedded software firm focused on embedded vision applications. And his talk is Evolving Algorithmic Requirements for Recognition and Classification in Augmented Reality. And that's going to focus, I think, if I understand it correctly, on two different approaches for pose detection, which is figuring out where a camera is and where it's pointed, one of which is substantially harder than the other.
Yes.
So.
Hey, good afternoon again. So CogniVue actually is a embedded vision technology company. We're licensing the processor core to semiconductor companies, and you'll see some of that technology out there. If you've had your sketch done, the smart pen that the artist is using is actually using a first generation of our image cognition processor core, and there's a bunch of automotive products coming out in this year with different automotive manufacturers using the first generation chip and core. My background is basically fabless semiconductor design, programmable DSP, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what CogniVue sees in the way of embedded vision challenges for augmented reality. So the outline is just talk about what's the challenge about always-on vision for augmented reality. This is a no-brainer, but I'll emphasize it at the beginning. And then I'll talk about what is used largely today for augmented reality, which is marker-based techniques, and then what is involved in markerless augmented reality, the major processing steps, and the challenge associated with that, and then the implications on processor performance. So, mobile devices, wearables, Internet of Things type products are full of sensors, but in general, the most important sensors really missing from most products still, and that's the ability to see. And I don't mean camera for recording, of course, or taking pictures, but of course the ability to detect objects and recognize them. And the reason why you haven't seen that, cameras doing sophisticated vision processing is because of the heat dissipation, battery limitations, and cost effectiveness of the technologies that are out there today to do it in an always-on sense, so that you can, for instance, have your Google glasses doing not just some video recording or heads-up display, but the glasses also detecting objects in real time without the battery dying in 5 minutes. So why mobile? Well, mobile, basically, we're looking at that because, of course, everybody's got a phone, and that's likely one of the key devices where this will appear, always on vision. The gap, though, is around power. So as an example, you probably only can get about 30 to 60 minutes maximum doing some sort of vision processing in a typical 2,000 milliamp battery that's in a phone. The glass, Google's Glass today gets about 1 hour of battery life if the video's on, and there's no vision processing. So just to give you an idea where things are at today. Performance and cost-wise, of course, the existing applications processors, they do fantastic things, but they're, you've got quad-core Cortexes with a DSP and a GPU in them. Everything but kitchen sink is basically in these SoCs today. Fundamentally, they're not that efficient, even though they can do some of the vision processing. They're not that efficient for doing vision. And as an example, best case you can do maybe stereo vision with the latest and greatest Snapdragon apps processor. And you really need about 30 times that performance if you're going to do longer range vision with, let's say, 1080p stereo. So let's take a look first at augmented reality processing flow. You've got very high level diagram here showing the steps, which is basically acquisition, tracking, rendering, and then putting the augmented image on display, or you might be doing something else with whatever you've rendered. If you look at the processing time on an iPhone 4, the acquisition stage takes about 17 milliseconds, the rendering stage about 23 milliseconds. The tracking stage in the middle is what I'm going to talk about, and that makes, if you really have 50 milliseconds to get from the camera to the display, that means the tracking section, you only have about 10 milliseconds left over to do that tracking. So the detection of objects, the classification of an object, and the tracking of it. So you got 10 milliseconds of processing delay that you can work with. Marker-based augmented reality, it's, of course, using a marker, a well-defined marker, and it's done this way, of course, because it simplifies tremendously the vision processing load. So you have a little symbol that's got 4 corners on it, predefined, and all you have to do is basically render a graphic on top of wherever you recognize that specific symbol. So the vision processing demand naturally would be significantly less, and this makes this type of augmented reality easy. If you look at the steps, then it's really grayscale conversion, binarization, contours, and candidate matching, and then some distortion correction potentially of the actual marker itself. So this is fairly straightforward in order to get an idea of the camera pose relative to the marker, and therefore render the object correctly on top of the marker. However, if you look at processor cores that are out there, at phones actually in particular, and the processor speeds for doing this kind of an operation, the detection and tracking on the device itself, you really actually can't do it today very well. So even on a phone today, these are common ones, let's say iPhone 3G or 4G. The 4G is doing, say, a megapixel of processing, and it still takes 182 milliseconds to do this sort of marker-based augmented reality. So, higher performance chips are obviously needed to do this in real time, and significantly lower power consumption. And that's just marker-based. Now, if we get to, incidentally, the Apex core, which is appearing in the 2nd generation version, will appear in chips early next year. It can do this kind of processing in less than 2 milliseconds for a megapixel in sort of milliwatt range of power. Markerless based processing, however, is significantly more difficult, and of course it's what you really need to do. You can't have markers all around doing in the world, so you have to figure out the pose of the camera somehow without having these markers. And so you can do that in a number of ways. First of all, you can use some of the sensors that are in the device to help figure out the pose. The more normal one, and the one that's always going to be there, is some sort of visual tracking to estimate the camera's pose. And that's usually detecting of natural features and determining the camera's relative position to those natural features. So let's look at the natural feature tracking steps then. So if you divide it up in basic chunks, you've got key point detection, feature extraction, and then feature matching. Those are the 3 fundamental blocks that occur in natural feature tracking. And if you look at just first the feature detection part, you're typically going to use algorithms that you would find in OpenCV, Harris corner detector, good features to track, or FAST. FAST is commonly used right now because it requires less processor performance for conventional processors like an ARM RISC processor. But it's not necessarily the best for accuracy or precision, so other types of feature detectors are better. And then the descriptor part is actually the heavy lifting that's needed. And here you've got algorithms like SIF, SURF that are commonly used for doing the feature description. And then the last stage, of course, is the pose estimation. And you might use RANSAC for that. So SIFT, let's look at the thing that's the heavy lifting part of the processing pipeline, and that's the feature description, and in this case SIFT. So SIFT across a bunch of CPUs on these different devices, iPads and iPhones. You can see the process delay is significant. It's in the order of a couple of seconds. Those are milliseconds, so thousands of milliseconds. And even with the GPU-CPU combination, let's say if you look at the applications processor, a Snapdragon S4 or Tegra 250, you're still dealing in the hundreds of milliseconds, and you need to be down in the 10 millisecond range, as I said. So you're still going to struggle at doing real-time markerless-based augmented reality. The CogniVue Gen 2 Apex, the one that's out in chips early next year, and we have a Gen 3 version that's going to be announced shortly, does it in the range that it makes it realizable, and at a power consumption number, of course, that will make this possible. So Gen 2 is giving us about 50x improvement in the performance over these conventional architectures today, and maybe about 100x if you're looking at it in terms of performance per power. Gen 3 will probably provide somewhere between 4 and 8x of that when it's released later this year. So just let's take a look at a feature descriptor. Is another one you can use called HOG, and HOG was inspired by SIFT. It's computationally very similar in complexity to SIFT, so we're going to use that one as an example. Uncanny Vision, which is a partner of CogniVue. We just announced today actually our Apex partnership program. Uncanny's a member of that. DMP out of Japan is a member. Newsoft is about 8 of these partners. Uncanny in particular is focused on doing a very optimized implementation of OpenCV. And in fact, has gotten some great results. They got about 10 times better than what you see in OpenCV out of the box. And you can see here on the Cortex A9 and A15, they're getting, like I said, about that 10x improvement in the OpenCV HOG and SVM implementation for VGA resolution. However, again, it's still actually, even at 10x improvement, on optimizing those HOG and SVM feature descriptors, you're still far from actually having something that's real time. And of course, power consumption-wise, it would still be high. So again, if you do HOG and SVM on an Apex, you can do it at about 10 milliseconds using our Gen 2 technology at 600 megahertz, and a Gen 3 later this year will do it in about 2.5 milliseconds. So our architectural implications, basically, for real-time performance for a markerless-based or marker-based augmented reality, you have to fit everything in a sort of 50 millisecond window, of which you have about 10 milliseconds to do this feature detection, tracking, and matching. And then if you really wanted low power consumption and really low process delay, you might be trying to aim it at about 5 milliseconds. And if you're looking at markerless space, you're in particular probably doing some sort of natural feature tracking. And really, mobile devices, to do this properly, real-time, low power, need about 100x improvement in where they're at today. Good thing is, most of the chip companies realize this, and they're going to be solving this problem with interesting technologies from companies like CogniVue, SIVA, Cadence. They also have vision processor cores that are trying to solve this problem. Wearable AR applications, of course, will benefit from this as well. Anything is extremely bandwidth limited or performance limited. And our G2 Apex, which is available now, and the G3 Apex, which is coming out later this year, will certainly make this realizable. Thank you.